Evening all on YouTube and Play Chess. Okay, yeah, just watched the England match against Costa Rica. Coffee. No, it's Costa Rica and that was a draw. So am I going to show you more interesting games tonight? Maybe. Don't have too high expectations about this. This is just Blitz games. So yeah, I can read the comments on stream, by the way, and welcome to those on Play Chess. I'll say hi all. So we're going to look at some Blitz games and see what qualities which Magnus Carlsen has, which enabled him to do a triple, victory, become classical world champion, rapid chess world champion, which is actually I quite like rapid games, and also Blitz champion, which I quite kind of like Blitz games as well. So these forms of chess, they're all good fun. And now it was a 21 round tournament, and I usually only do about an hour. So what I've done, I've checked out the games in advance that I want to look at, and I think we should try and split it up into the first 7, then next week, the next 7, and then the last 7 after that. So my plan is 7 at a time, chunks of 7. Now the first game, there's a bit of uncertainty about what really happened. I'm not sure, they were recording the game properly, but let's have a look at it anyway. The first game, just for the record. So Vladimir Fedoseev, 2662, was white against Magnus. Let's flip the board. I hope the board is big enough. I've tried to make the board a little bit bigger, by the way, on stream. So the board's okay, I hope. So Vladimir Fedoseev kicked off with d4. And, really I'm looking for tips, for myself as well, because I'm an active Blitz player. I want to see, what can I learn from these games. And if there's anything I think is useful, I'll make a note of it. Not just for you, but for me. So that's the way this is going to work. So the time control was 3 minutes each and 2-second increments, I believe. So the increment makes it a little better for endgame play. Fischer's legacy. In endgames, you can have much higher quality, in theory, with the 2-second increment. And that's good for Magnus, actually, because he's very good at endgames. So he plays here d5. And after c4, c6, so the Slav defense keeps this bishop free. So that's one advantage. If you look at the old Queen's Gambit declines, they suffered that the bishop was imprisoned, voluntarily. So it's kind of almost you could see it as an upgrade, of the Queen's Gambit declined, keeping that foothold on d5. So knight f3, knight f6. Now white volunteers to close the bishop with e3. So closing that bishop, so that usually means, well, white has got secure support for that pawn if ever black takes, and also maybe later the bishop can come like this, or white can play later for e4 and leave the bishop on that diagonal. It comes out like over there later. Now Magnus played bishop g4 here. I just want to check the theory as well in this position. I'll connect to the ChessBase live book. The most popular move is actually apparently bishop f5, over 5,000 games, e6. Bishop g4 is the third most popular. h3 is the theory move, it seems. Well, the most used move from white. Not touching this bishop, just asking this bishop to go away. It rarely does, actually. Most common is just taking on f3, but Magnus actually did play this move. It's still very popular to move the bishop there. Knight c3, e6, standard stuff. g4, standard stuff. You might think it looks unusual, but it's the standard move. Now knight e5. So white is trying to get that light square bishop now, not giving black at all a chance to play h6. Because, if for example, white had played, say white had played a casual move, then black could get the bishop here, an escape square. So knight e5 bishop here, I assume. So anyway, the knight immediately goes to have the option of taking the bishop. So if h6, we just double the pawns. Now knight bd7. Just check the theory on knight bd7, actually, live book here. Has that disappeared? Live book disappeared. Great. No, knight bd7 is the main move. Now white usually in this position does take in this position knight takes g6. There's 150 games here with that. Magnus played a very rare move. Sorry, not Magnus. Magnus is playing black. His opponent plays queen b3 here, so we're out of book with this move. So usually, yeah, knight takes g6 is played. For example, like this, bishop d2, and the game can continue like this. This is quite popular. But no, that didn't happen. So we see queen b3. And queen c7. And so white now did take on g6. H takes g. So immediately there's a threat here of knight takes g4 because we've got a little bit of dynamic play already. Actually, I'll put on like a bit so just in case I start to miss some stuff. So here, I'm going to add a Qb7 at this point, and I did install finally Stockfish 5 and linked it up with my chess base. So Stockfish 5, yeah. Okay, so H takes G, bishop G2 was played, knight B6. This is an interesting move. This is, for me, it rings a bell. Why is knight B6 played? Why would you want to play knight b6? Let's just rewind that. It's interesting to me because it uses that kind of weak pawn to try and force the tension issue, to relieve this tension immediately. You know, white could have timed c5 or cd at his own choosing, but it's forced. You know, if black had played, say, castles, then white could have the option here of taking, or a4. Let's see, and knight b6. There's another option, c5, for example. So anyway, black tries to force white to commit to that pawn. c5 in this position, I guess the knight could go back, and black doesn't have to then castle queenside. Black could try for the e5 break. So it's a little finesse to play knight b6 immediately, I guess. C takes, e takes, queen c2. And there's potentially a threat of knight b5 in some lines. It doesn't do anything at the moment. The bishop now protects the queen. b3. Black castles queenside now. Bishop b2. This game gets a bit crazy. I don't think it was recorded properly. So I don't want to give this game too much attention. But here g5 is a nice move. These double pawns are fixing the dark squares and discouraging h4 and f4. So king b1. Anyone want to ask any questions at the moment? The game isn't complete. I'm a bit worried about this particular game. I don't think it's been. I can't see a recording anywhere on the internet for this game, which seems convincing. It stops at a certain point. So at the moment, though, the evaluation is slightly better for black. If anyone's better, tiny fractionally better. It's about equal. Queen e7, rook here, and it looks as though, you know, white's trying to break open the position with e4, e5. Magnus tries to dampen that down, and white carries on trying to play for e4 now with f3. Rook he8. Rook e2, as though the rook's going to be doubled, then e4. So it looks like a totally classical, plan from white. Knight fd7. And here's the weird bit, the first really weird bit of this game. For me, that a3 was played, seemingly offering the a3 pawn. And I'm afraid I don't know if this really happened. I'm having trouble believing. Remember, these are Blitz games. So it's great that they're recorded, and you think, we're high-tech enough to record them accurately. But it seems weird black didn't play bishop takes a3. Unless anyone has some weird concept behind this, I can't see it. Is white going to play bishop a1 and then e4 later? Is that the problem? I mean, I guess we could make a case that this is some sort of gambit here, or is it? I don't know. It just seems weird. If that really happened, if a3 really happened, it doesn't seem as though anything technically at least is so bad about taking, but apparently bishop takes, knight f8. Now e4 finally, knight e6, rook e1. Black was threatening, I think, knight f4 here, as well as this pawn seems to be hanging all the time. So this doesn't look like the right move order. So that's why I didn't want to give this game too much attention. It's only for showing you what I've got available. I think on two different sources. It's just weird. Bishop a5, okay, kicking the queen. Knight e7, king b7, queen d7. So the knight goes to g6 apparently. Well, black does have a lockdown on the dark squares. Check. Okay, the knight goes in. Queen a4, we see b5 apparently. Queen b7, queen b6, king b7, and rook h8. And here the game score ends, I'm afraid. As I say, I didn't want any expectations built on this game, and we should just swiftly move forward. But before we do, well, Qb3 at chessgames.com said there was a lot more to this game, and Magnus managed to grind down an endgame from this position much later on. But this seems to be the available score on two sites for it. I don't know if ChessBase will get a greater score than this. Someone's going to do a reconstruction from the videos, but this is all I have at move 40. The evaluation at this point was equal. Magnus has the two knights versus the bishop pair, so it's interesting that he has no bias for giving the opponent two bishops. The knights seem in very nicely entrenched squares. An interesting game up to a point, but I think more interest is in these other games. That's why I want to move ahead. Okay, so let's go to round 2. So eventually, apparently Magnus won that game. So Gadir Gusanov, let's have a look at this. This is more interesting, I believe. So Magnus playing white plays d4. So Gadir Gusanov, he's 2613. His rating. We see knight f3 here from Magnus, and not playing c4 now, but a more solid idea. In Livebook, c4 is by far the most popular, but g3 is actually the second most popular here. Bishop g7. No, the first game wasn't a loss on time. Apparently there was a lot more to the game, but no one has the recording for it. I don't know if it was the first day and they had some technical issues. So yeah, this is the second game though. The others seem okay to me, the other game scores, what I've seen so far. So bishop g2, castles, d6. Now the most usual move is c4 here, which would be a king's Indian defense fianchetto variation, of course. Slightly rarer now, a4. It has been played before, a5. Now we see knight c3. So it looks like Pirt's transposition territory here. By transposition, looks like a Pirt's defense position. e5, rook e1. So white has a small edge here. h3, rook e8. Bishop e3. You see that h3 was to stop, I believe, the nuisance move knight g4. So the bishop can go here. And with the bishop going here, you know, these options of d5 and d takes need to be looked at from black perspective. Queen c7 seems solid enough. Queen d2. Looks as though maybe bishop h6 is introduced as a possibility. The engine doesn't really rate that move much as a possible move though. E takes d4, releasing the tension. Was there a need to release that central tension? Let's imagine black played b6. I'm not entirely sure this seems playable as well for black. So black released the tension, and that's the most frequently played move anyway in this position apparently. Knight takes, knight c5. So black's getting that pressure on e4 by doing that, but potentially d6 is vulnerable. And actually Magnus now looks at d6 with bishop f4, and also of course protects the pawn three ways against the three attackers here. So e4 under great scrutiny, but in return d6. So it's a classic trade-off here from both sides for pressure. So now we see knight fd7, and the knight might come to e5 now, and with that there might be some other possibilities like knight c4 being introduced. So one has to be concerned about counterplay. Have I just led you? I've just led you to something else altogether. What on earth have I done? I've just shown you a variation of a game which didn't happen. Oh, sorry, hold on a sec. Oh man. So we had this point, rook e1. Am I going completely mad here? No, this is the game continuation. A little bit. Sorry, knight d7, e4, e5, knight c3, rook e8, h3. No, e takes d4 wasn't played. Move 56. I'm just going to check. Move 56 is rook d6. Oh, Muppets. Muppets. E takes d4 wasn't played. Oh, dear oh dear. b6 was played. I'm showing you a different game. Bishop e3, bishop b7. So black didn't play like that. Now white closed the position. Oh, pardon me. White closes the position. I've just shown you a different variation altogether. Well, that was interesting. A sideline. No, this is what happened. d5, giving up the c5 square. Knight c5. Now e4 needs to be protected. Knight d2. Knight c4. And black now plays f5, trying to undermine this structure. Okay, now here, this is interesting. That white tries to fix black's structure on the king side. So white plays e takes f5. After g takes f5, fixes the f5 pawn with f4. So not worried about e takes f4 here in particular. Actually, the engine gives e takes f4 as the strongest move anyway. E takes f4. So say bishop takes. This is an engine suggestion. Bishop takes. Rook takes. Queen f6. There's some play here on things with knight e4 apparently. So this will be interesting for black. But black actually played e4, and that doesn't seem to be as comfortable now because this structure can be attacked, and this bishop, this d4 square is given to white to attack that bishop. So we see bishop d4, and black I don't think hasn't got anything clever in this position. Say knight d3 interrupting this bishop. That's an interesting try, which I was looking at when I did go over the game before, so I should have known we were going on a different game. Knight d3, white just ignores this. White just plays bishop takes g7 and can play bishop d4, and this is just equal. Okay, so knight d3 wasn't tried. In fact, bishop takes d4 check was played, and now we see queen e7, knight e3 looking at f5. The queen is ready to protect the f5 pawn with queen f7, g4 hitting this pawn chain quite hard. So white seems to have a dominating position with the knights holding d5 and putting pressure on black's structure. And black now felt compelled to take on g4. I'm not sure what else would be suggestible here. I don't think anything else is good. You know, knight here, we can just play knight takes f5 and even threaten knight h6. There's nothing good about that. It's worth checking out sometimes dynamic possibilities. F takes. Sorry, after g4, yeah, f takes was played. Knight takes g4. Now threatening knight h6 check. Queen g7. Magnus just takes g7, and he's won a pawn now with knight takes e4 temporarily, or is it temporary or permanent? So we're about to find out here. Well, let's look here at bishop takes d5. This wasn't played. Black took on e4. If bishop takes d5, knight takes c5, discovering an attack on the bishop and also hitting the knight looks very nice. This is good enough to win. Or even knight e6 check. But so knight takes, that's good enough. So that's why that pawn on d5 cannot be taken. So white is now a pawn up. Knight takes e4, bishop takes e4. Is it easy to convert? So that's the next question. Let's see, h5. And now instead of retreating here, this is probably an okay move as well. Because knight c5 doesn't seem to do much. Bishop f3, and white's still holding the d5 pawn. And on rook f8, well, that pawn's attacked on h5. But Magnus actually here counterattacked with bishop f5, which the engine suggests might be a small inaccuracy actually. It reckons knight f2 slightly better. But let's move on. Rook takes, rook takes. And now apparently knight c5 might be an interesting try. That does look at the a4 pawn here. So we've got two pawns attacked as well as the knight. Black maybe should have done that. Black actually played h takes g4, and this leaves white with a small advantage now. Because after bishop takes d7, now you might think, well, what about this d5 pawn here? This position is quite promising still for white. Bishop takes g4, threatening rook e7 check. This is a small advantage for white. We've got this passed h pawn. So if the king moves here, say, this is okay. That's okay. So black actually played g takes h3. And now white reinforces the d5 pawn with c4, because this can be taken soon, probably at leisure. Rook f8, rook e4. Now after bishop c8, Magnus is in quite a nice endgame position and cuts off black's king to start with. But there's an issue here with the f4 pawn you might be concerned with. What if black attacks f4? In the game, king f7 was played. But let's have a look at rook f8. Believe it or not, if black had played rook, this is given by the engine as equal actually. Rook f8 seems to be like one of the better moves. Probably for a more advanced reason. After check, we can actually play this. And if takes like this, and if rook c6, we can start to bring the king in. So this would be quite good for black. But no, black didn't do that. Black didn't play rook f8. We can't be hard on any players, by the way, because it's just Blitz. Black actually played this move, king f7, protecting against rook e7 check. And now king h2. Now rook h8, trying to defend the pawn for a bit longer. Rook e3. Okay, rook h4, hitting the f pawn like that. But now, after takes here, this is looking like a potential improvement for white. You might have thought, but no, actually this position is also apparently absolutely dead equal according to the engine here. 0.00, absolutely dead equal. If we throw this check in, this was played, so let's follow this. Taking, check, taking, equal so far. So this is a particular skill of Magnus. So king e4 to win these sort of endings. So temporarily giving up the a pawn because sights are set on one of these two with rook c6, for example. Takes rook c6. And what about this pin, you might ask? That's actually exploited here. Check. And now giving up a pawn temporarily with king e5 is played. So the question asked from black is how to take on c4. Black took with the rook on c4. If b takes c4, this apparently is just equal technically. Rook a6, d6, although it's a little bit scary, that advanced pawn. Apparently this should just be equal in theory. That's what the engine suggests anyway. But rook takes c4 was played, and this again is supposedly equal. Rook c1, check, taking, but it looks as though, you know, white looks better with his king more aggressive. Does it actually mean something? It means something now, apparently, after rook c4. This apparently is I thought I saw an evaluation shift, but maybe I just dreamt it. Sorry, rook d4. Now this move, rook d4 here, apparently in this position, if you were a computer, you would be able to hold it. Apparently, king f7 in the check here, rook d4, say here, king e5. This looks as though it might be some sort of weird draw, but yeah, that move wasn't played. King f7 wasn't played. We see rook d4 instead, and here now white gets a big advantage apparently with rook b7, so that cuts that king. Classic cutting the king. Rook c4, and now we see check, and king d7. So the king is dominating the other king here. And I had this in a Blitz game myself recently against an IM, and it's important to be aware of that kind of opposition, that taking away all the squares from the opponent's king. So that's a really powerful shield against the opponent's king here. And this is actually given by the engine, believe it or not, as a totally decisive advantage of more than +5 here. So king f6 was played, d6. That pawn seems to be going places. King d8, rook d4, d7. You see, there's always a check here to evict the king, trying to attack this one. And that's used here, check. Now in this position, there's only one winning move apparently, and I want to check if anyone's awake. So what would you play to win this position with white? There are a few choices with the king. So what one would you play here with white? If I gave you 20 seconds starting from now. Is this chat still working? Hi there, any ideas? What would you play with white? Alright, so some ideas. Can I have it in the correct notation? So king c7 from... one of you? Another suggestion, king c8. So we got one vote on play chess for king c7, one for c8. Or 2 for king c7, and on stream there's a few votes for king c7, and there's 2 for e7. So these guys that said king c8 or king e7, somehow it's not up to it to win the position, king e7 or king c8, from an engine point of view. Let's see why. So if king c8, black has here either king c4 or king c5 to have a good position. So that looks at the rook, so we can't queen. And actually what we do now with white is with black is just take here. And it's quite brutal actually, because that pawn is a draw now. It's a total draw. And so even king c5 wasn't even needed here. So king c8, we could actually even draw with king c4 with the same thing, that we're just giving up the rook. and this pawn draws. Now king e8, sorry, king e7 was the other one mentioned. Apparently this is just a draw, but funny enough, king c4 loses because of rook d6, but black actually can draw with king c5. So we've got that particular tactic on. We're attacking the rook, and we're controlling the d6 square. So if here, now we can just take here, and we get the same thing. We're drawing this position. So the only move that apparently won, and this is the beautiful cruelty of rook and pawn endings, and I've seen this cruelty in rook and pawn endings when doing long streams on FIDE games. They're so cruel, these rook and pawn endings, to get right. So in this position, it seems king c7 wins. So let's see, why does this win and the others draw? Well, in the game, king c4 was played here. Now if check, king b7, and the king is not doing a favour to the rook, it's in the way of the rook. So I think we're just queening the pawn next. So that's an important position. And also the rook stopping this guy. So that also helps. So king c7, and you might think, well, so that's why king c4 was played. Isn't there any hope with this guy coming down? Well, Magnus now plays, he doesn't play this. That's just the draw, because he does that. He does rook d6. And now if this is where black resigned. If b6, sorry, if b3, we just take and it's check, and then we queen with check. So what does black actually do here? If takes, then is one move away. b3, and we're going to just stop that now. It's a routine thing to get that pawn now. With all the checks, there's no time, we're going to get that pawn. So king c7 needed to be accurate here. King c7 was the move to win that rook and pawn ending. So it's quite good because it gives, it leaves that king in the bad places. This one's good after. And if king e5, we can just queen here, and that rook's going to munch. The king's in the wrong place for that pawn. So king c7 it is, and that won the game there. So that was more instructive for Magnus Carlsen's endgames in this position. So do you all get that the accuracy of rook and pawn endings is really quite amazing sometimes. So king c8, king e7, they just draw. King e8, no one mentioned. This same thing, we just draw with this, because we're going to just take here and queen our pawn. So we'll go on to another game now, and this is a quick. I don't think that was the most interesting bit of the game. I think the rook and pawn ending. So now against one of the top French players, Laurent Fresnay next in round 3. So Magnus playing black, and this gave me some amusement actually. The opening of this game was quite amusing. e4. And I think this is like my expression when looking at these games. I like to think of the double-edged sword concept, but this is extreme double-edged swords, because I have played the Alekai myself in Blitz. But after e5, I usually play knight d5. Actually, knight g8 was played by Magnus, and the difference is knight d5 has been played over 11,000 times. It's sort of mainline Alekai defense. Knight g8 on my live book is played about 30 times, 35 times. So there's a difference between 35 and 11,000. But is knight g8 so bad? What do you think about this? You see, I think we can celebrate the pawn being on e5 here. If we look at the double-edged sword concept here, white has weakened f5 and d5, and also the pawn can be easily attacked with d6. So why wouldn't most of us play this ever in Blitz? And Magnus Carlsen is playing it in Blitz. Is it so bad? I think one reason is if strong players always avoid knight g8, then you never get to see any examples and it doesn't kind of ripple through in popularity. But now that Magnus has used this in a serious Blitz championship, maybe, you know, this is going to be on the rage now, at least in Blitz. Knight g8. Can it be refuted? d4, d6, immediately attacking this, immediately threatening to take the queen off and disrupt white castling anywhere. So knight f3. And now we see the move c6. And white cautiously plays h3, maybe concerned about a potential pin. Bishop f5, using that lovely, you know, f5 square, so already celebrating f5. Bishop d3. And already it looks as though black solved his classic problem piece here. This bishop on c8 has been solved. D takes e5, knight takes e5, and it looks like a very solid position indeed. In fact, I don't think there's any problem with e6. Magnus actually played knight d7, threatening immediately knight takes and then queen takes. Bishop f4, knight gf6, knight c3. And it's about equal, this position. 0.26, 0.30, believe it or not. You might think there's been some violation of general principles with the knight g8 move. But this is what the engine indicates. It looks like an absolutely solid position. Although white might have the extra tempo, if you've got no exploitable weaknesses, then what's the problem? Knight takes, bishop takes, e6. Solid. In fact, white has the weakness, that backward pawn here, potentially. White castles queenside, bishop e7. King b1, black castles, queen g3. Okay, tying the knight, you know, potentially to g7. Knight h5, hitting the queen. And protecting g7, of course, otherwise that's mate. So queen f3, looking at the knight, asking it to go back. And now we see the move h4, which might have the idea of h5, h6, trying to loosen the dark squares. Knight d7, knight e4. Okay, there's a bit of a trade-off here that... if we did play knight takes e5, it gives white a nice hold on the d6 square. Does Magnus really want to do that in this particular position? Well, first he plays queen a5, looking at the bishop like that as well, and that's protected. Putting the queen there now makes a subtle improvement with threatening mate as well. So a subtle improvement now on taking on e5. He doesn't want to play f6, it seems. F6 is not so pleasant, actually, because it does kind of weaken this, and bishop d6 or even bishop c7 is possible here, and white would apparently be a little bit better in this position. You can see that this pawn is a bit vulnerable on the e file, so Magnus radically gives up the knight here for that bishop, seemingly giving white a nice grip on d6, but this is a dark square bishop, rook a d8, and it's holding key squares at the moment. And you might think, well, technically, isn't knight f6 dangerous here? Apparently not, actually. The best idea is not king h8, knight d7 hits the rook. This could be quite dangerous, apparently, for black, potentially. No, just taking is fine. Even taking is fine. After takes g6, this should be okay for black as well. Any attempt to go for this is just a bit too slow, I think. The back row is a bit vulnerable here anyway. So this is okay for black as well. So in the game, we see here d takes e5, we see rook here, we see knight d6 instead of knight f6, knight d6. Okay, and now black plays bishop takes d6, Rook takes. And this is a slight mistake apparently. Apparently white should have taken like this. And be prepared to reinforce that pawn with, say, rook d3. We can just reinforce this pawn apparently. And this should be just about okay. Should be equal here, where white is holding that pawn with everything. And black's okay. It's equality. It's 0-0-0 here. But the way white's played this seems a bit looser here with rook takes. So Magnus takes that pair of rooks off, rook d8, rook d1, rook d7, and you might think, well, what's the difference here? Let's see what happened now. b3, h6. To be fair, it looks as though white still has a good position. Queen f4, white has a small advantage. So at the moment, it's not too weak. Queen c5, it's held. g3. Now f6, as though e5 is on the cards, maybe to engulf this pawn. Rook d3 means that actually queen d2 can be used on e5. Now, so let's just check that. e5, but there's also queen g4 as well, apparently. Queen g4 is actually stronger here. If rook takes there, this doesn't work. b4. And the rook's hanging. So the engine suggestion here is actually queen g4. And that looks pretty dangerous. No, but Magnus didn't play that. He played king f7. Maybe he saw that. King f7. And in this position, queen d2, e5, equal still, rook c3. Now this is a painful pin. Quite interesting. So white was protecting the pawn before that, and maybe should have been able to hold this in theory, although black is looking at the f2 pawn as well. The engine suggests f4 as being equal with e4, rook d4. This position should be equal. But this move, rook c3 here, looks suspect. Black could have immediately actually played rook takes d6. This looks to be like winning a pawn. But actually Magnus chose to pin the rook with queen b4. Still threatening rook takes d6. And we see white is in a bit of a state. You might think, can't he just repair this situation? What about just rook d3 here? The thing is, this is not nice now. We can just take here and king e6. And this pawn is a weakness. That's horrible. So it seems, unfortunately, white has been proven to have overstretched with this pawn on d6. Magnus is now going to win a pawn. So rook takes d6, pawn up. And keeps that horrible pin now this way, a real pin against the king. Check. Queen f5. This pawn might be vulnerable to a check here, so it's moved, and also threatens b4, winning the rook. a3, stopping that. King g8, b4, and we see king f7 again. Queen c8. Now h5 is played, starting to fix these guys. Queen f5, and also it provides this next move, queen g4, protected by the pawn. Where is the queen going in this position? The queen hasn't got any squares. Apart from over here, the queen doesn't really want to go over there, I guess. Although that does seem, technically, the engine is suggesting that's plausible. But it doesn't, it looks a bit odd, but it's difficult to exploit it. But no, white actually took the queen off here. So pawn down in this rook and pawn ending is not good news against Magnus Carlsen, who's a real grinder, as we saw in the World Championship against Anand. So he protects that c6, freeing up the rook. And now also rook d4 is threatened. So rook e3, rook d5 now. Why rook d5 instead of rook d4? Let's have a quick look. Rook d4, there's c3. This is still okay for black. So Magnus played, he just played this, I think with the intention of weakening this structure. He assumes that this is going to be played, I think, c3. And now c5, so he wants to leave a weak pawn on b4. Sorry, c5, king c2. No, this is the interesting bit. After c5 here, you might think this is the idea, but with king c2, white now has the idea of, if he wanted, of rook d3. So at this critical moment, Magnus played c4, and you might wonder, okay, could c takes work here? That's my question. Let's have a quick look. C takes. I think it is better for black as well, this position. But it might be a bit trickier than the game. If white can try and hold this, it might be a little bit trickier. So yeah, Magnus actually took some space instead with the move c4. So after rook e4, f5, and now the king comes in. And it looks as though, you know, this is quite delicious because of e4, king e5 and f4 on the cards. For example, we see king c1. Weakness of the last move though, pounced on. Rook d3, not minding the exchange of rooks there, that's easily supported. So we see here king c2. You know, trying to, because if the rook had moved here, we just drop c3, and that's really the end of the game. So white is helpless now here. Basically, he plays this, and Magnus just takes that rook, leaving white with a terrible position. King d5, with the king coming to e4 here, it's really hopeless. King e4, and it's the engine gives actually a mate in 14 here. That's how bad it is. Let's see what would happen in this position if white had played on. I don't know, maybe white lost on time. This isn't move 50. Let's see white playing king e2. What would black be up to here? Apparently both g6 and f4 actually win. If g6, that looks like a zugzwang anyway. So if the king moves here, we can just go here. If the king goes here, we can just go here. So that's a zugzwang anyway. So yeah, what started with a provocative opening, I don't know how many of you have played knight g8. Has anyone played knight g8 here in Blitz or in long games? Just out of interest. I mean, are you surprised by this game? Is anyone surprised by the opening? So this is Magnus Carlsen having a bit of fun with his openings in Blitz. Anyone shocked? Has everyone seen this game? What did you think about this? White was left with a weak d6 pawn, which lost the game, essentially. If we look at this, that d6 pawn later on essentially lost the game. Even though at some point it looked as though it might be a useful pawn. Yeah, it was. I think this plan of engulfment later is dangerous. The pawn's not brilliant, is it? It's interesting though. Magnus is like the predator or something. You know, white maybe had set this trap up that to engulf the pawn you had to play e5. Magnus totally sidesteps like in the film The Predator. If he had played e5, he would have been in big trouble here after queen g4. You know, this little trap here with b4 is cunning. I don't know if the opponent actually saw that, because we're losing the rook. Queen c8 doesn't do anything, but b4 just wins the rook. It's a bit naughty. So yeah, like Predator, he sort of sidesteps with king f7, so that's pretty cool. So he's made it look easy, engulfing this pawn. And I mean, this actually essentially lost the pawn going into this pin. I mean, because if the rook moves, we just take and then king e6, engulfing the pawn. Yeah, so yeah, it was impressive, I thought. For Blitz. Let's go on to another game then. So against Ituruzaga, this is in round 4. So in round 4, if I can get the score sheet in properly. Okay, Magnus playing white against Ituruzaga, who's 2-6-5-3. d4, Magnus playing white, knight f6, c4, knight f3, and he has this kind of bind on the d5 square with the white pieces. Black's most usual move is e6 actually here, slightly more popular than g6. g6 was actually played. g3, d6. So white's got a nice pressure here on the d5 square. And here Magnus actually played knight takes c6, which you might think is a little bit surprising. In Livebook, white usually castles actually, or knight c2. You might find it surprising because aren't you offering black to repair the d5 square a little bit and drag a pawn towards the center? Well, still white is okay here. White's still got a pleasant position. This sort of position is okay actually. So anyway, black took with the bishop actually, which is okay as well. But we're left with this Maroczy bind on d5. So white castles, both sides castle, bishop e3, a5. Yeah, this is typical because it wants to discourage b4, and this knight often comes here to c5. So queen e2, knight d7. Rook fd1, not minding any double pawn thing here. I think this would be too dangerous. But having said that, the engine suggests, yeah, double the pawns. The engine is indicating double the pawns. It has no fear about its king safety here and thinks this should be okay for black. But black didn't do that. No, we see a4, which seems to carry the idea of a3 to undermine the knight. To undermine the knight like this. But, okay, is a4 that good? It's quite committal. You know, maybe b6 more solid, just trying to keep the function of that to stop b4 later when that knight's protected. So a4 is a little bit on the committal side. Rook ac1, queen a5. It does give the queen that square. Is the queen going to go over here? Knight d5, looking at e7. Black now took that, and we see rook takes, queen a6. So is c4 a useful target? h4 is played. Rook fc8. And white doesn't really want to give black too much counterplay here. with b3, you can see that this is going to give counterplay, because black could take and then has activated this whole A file, and this is quite useful. No, you don't want to do that. Rook b5, a great way of protecting the pawn, and there's no little trick here that black has available to punish this. You know, this just would backfire. Well, actually, we just take the queen. Sorry, I was just thinking this one would backfire as well, the check. So that protects the b5 pawn, and puts pressure on the queen side here. So rook c7. Now h5, trying to damage black's king safety a little bit, maybe. So rook ac8. Interesting. Now this next move, interesting, I thought. h6. You might think, you might have thought hg was the idea. Very interesting. In fact, a nice term I came across recently, a phrase, attacking a color complex, comes to mind. With this move, white is now attacking g7, the dark squares. You also got these dark squares. Okay, so that color complex there. But this knight's kind of defending some key dark squares. We see after this bishop moves that we really might want to get rid of this knight later, or at least restrict it from knight c5. For the moment, b4 is played. So if this is left, this is uncomfortable for that knight. What could black actually do in this position? If he doesn't play en passant, what does black do? If knight e5, this is not very pleasant apparently, because rook a5, and then b5, rook takes, and that's not, we've just won the pawn and we're still protecting c4. So anyway, black did take the en passant option and now played knight c5. Is there any tactic here? Not yet. Queen d1 was played. Knight d7. And this is where the attack, Queen d1 actually puts some frontal pressure on d6. Bishop h3 is played, pinning the knight and getting ready to get rid of that knight, so white can carry on maybe attacking on the dark squares. In fact, if black tries to avoid this bishop takes knight, which you might think is weakening these squares, but that's not really exploitable. If black tries to play e6, that looks too much of a compromise here. White seems too comfortable there. So black kind of didn't mind that, rook a8, and white did actually take on d7. So we have this kind of attack on the dark square complex, and it carries on with bishop d4. So white's giving up his knight, bishop for the knight there. He's trying to really attack black on the dark squares, and this pawn will play a role now for king safety as well. Here, if e5, trying to avoid the exchange of bishops, this actually fells tactically. Can anyone spot why e5 fells tactically if you're awake? So if I give you 20 seconds here, what would you play with white? Any ideas? What would you play with white in this position? Is this chat still working over there? All right, now one of you on Play Chess has mentioned bishop e5. One of you has mentioned rook b6, and a couple of you have mentioned bishop e5 on stream. Actually, you're a bit distracted by that last move, because that's the centre of action. The bishop was actually also looking at a1 here sneakily. And in fact, rook a1 is a crushing move, because it wins a rook. That's funny, isn't it? Oh, God. It wins the queen for 2 pieces. That's horrible, isn't it? That is actually a threat here. So just for those technically minded, it also seems rook b6 is winning as well. If queen a5, the other one can do the same thing. Isn't that amusing? Bishop takes e5 is not as good, I think. Although it is still pretty good in winning a pawn. That is a good tactic, but not as strong as that rook a1. Okay. So anyway, black just took on d4. Queen takes d4. So now threatening mate in 1. f6. And the fun carries on now. Now this attack on the dark squares. These dark square pawns are attacked with... I wonder how you would carry on here with white. So this is really a dark square attack, this game, actually. A positional masterpiece combining positional considerations of a colour complex with tactics all around the shop. So what would white play in this position? What would you play here with white now? Which would damage black's pawn structure if I gave you that as a clue. So how would you damage black's pawn structure here? Any ideas? Any ideas how to damage black's pawn structure? Yeah, okay, yeah, well done. e5 if you've said e5. So we're still using this pin, and we've also got this rook eyeing e5. So rook takes e5, and we're threatening now rook e6 to shut that pawn from any defence of g7, to mate black on g7, because this pawn is still dangerous. Do you see that this is mega dangerous? If left, you know, if here, for example, rook e6, it's a forced mate in 7 apparently. There's nothing black can do. Engine move queen a1. Apart from that, so black took on e5, shattering the pawns. Queen takes d7. Black plays queen d6, losing a pawn. Queen takes b7. So we've got a nice pass pawn here. Queen f3, protecting the pawn here. Now c5 is on the cards. Queen d2. Rook d1. Okay, but queen d2 was a double attack. Magnus doesn't mind, because this check will get this pawn here, potentially. Or, even better, because if that pawn's taken, then this one's taken. Magnus just uses this position. These are double pawns anyway, so who cares? This pawn needs to be pushed. c5. Protecting this pawn, getting this pawn, stepping that up. So Magnus gave back his extra pawn to be in a better position here, ready for this pawn. He's got these 2 passed pawns. Black's got horrible, wretched structure, and the queen's a bit offside. Queen h5 doesn't do anything tactically at the moment, because rook takes b3, queen takes, is still protecting the rook. c6. Rook c8 does, sorry, c6. Rook c8 is threatening rook takes c6 now, because of queen takes h here. So the rook moves. Queen g5 looking at the rook. We see rook c3. So white is simply threatening, well now is also threatening not just c7, but also rook f3 check over here. So king g7, trying to do something about king safety. c7. Threatening now queen d7 and queen e6. Queen f6 guarding at least the e6 square. You might think, hold on a sec, Why isn't queen d7 possible here? Let's just quickly ask this question. If queen d7, now this is okay as well. I think Magnus might have played something stronger. Well, it's quite strong as well. Rook c6, queen f5, and now b4. This pawn is ready to just do this. And it's also ready to be traded for the e5 pawn. Check. Queen takes b4. Check. And apparently this is a forced mate in 12 with rook c1. This is a forced mate in 12. Rook c1. Magnus didn't play that. He plays check here. And now queen e6 looking at that rook. And the question is here now, what about this diagonal? In the game, we see king h6. If queen b7, well, white just takes on e7 then. And can do this, or do queen d7. So basically, black is in big trouble. King h6 was played. Trying to go for some sort of perpetual check. So takes check, no, or taking on c6, pardon me, taking on c6. But alas, check here is going to queen the pawn. And so black resigned here. So what was interesting about this game was earlier, I thought, this kind of scenario, I don't know how many of us would play like this. This whole plan of h6 not hg, and this idea of giving up this and this later, you see that the whole of black's dark squares were attacked. Do you see this? White now goes on the dark square attack, and it resulted in structural damage. A wrecked pawn structure, but it wasn't really just the double pawns which is causing black's downfall. It's these two pawns being passed. So yeah, they were really dangerous, these two pawns, and even if that's lost, this one it was still dangerous, as the game shows. So yeah, it's a really interesting game positionally, even though it's just a blitz game. It's a 3-minute blitz game with 2-second increments. But isn't that amazing, the quality? Who would have thought? These blitz games. Amazing. So, let's have a look at another one. So now against Pental Harikrishnan, one of the top Indian players in the world, been more than 2,700 quite a lot, is 2726 listed on this game. So Pental Harikrishnan. So Magnus is white, e4, and we see c5, knight f3, d6, and this move is the second most popular actually according to live, but not d4 as you might expect, but bishop b5 check. So the Moscow variation. Knight d7. Just check my live book again, keep revising the live book on this. Usually bishop d7 apparently is most frequently played, or knight c6. This is third choice usually, knight d7. White castled, knight f6. d4. Now black played a6. Usually c takes d4. They're both popular. White took. Knight takes. Knight c3. e6. And now often bishop g5 is actually played in this position, which reminds me of Mikhail Tao's last game actually. against Kasparov. I thought I've seen this before. Bishop g5, queen c7. This reminds me of the game Tao against Kasparov, where Tao came out of hospital and played in this Blitz tournament actually, and managed to beat Kasparov, apparently on time, but he still managed to beat Kasparov. But anyway, that reminds me of that for some reason. But anyway, d5 was played here. Maybe it is the same sequence. e5, a4. So this is more closed now. Bishop e7, knight d2. Black castles, knight c4. So pressure on d6, and white might be playing a5 later or playing f4 later. Knight b6. The knight drops back. Bishop g5. Now we see the move b3, and black voluntarily gives up the dark square bishop. Bishop takes e3 because he wants to play f5. It would be nice if black did get in f4. Magnus plays f4 though to stop that himself. White technically is apparently better here. White's immediately threatening to take and to take here, so black keeps things solid with knight d7. Tries to a5, queen e7, queen d2. Now black took on e4. We see f takes e5. So here's a decision point. How should black really take on e5? He actually took with the queen. So question, if knight takes, what happens? I think white is a little bit better apparently. Bishop g5, because we're always looking at that rook on f8 here. So this is slightly unpleasant for black, this sort of position. Bishop f4 would be threatening horrible things. So anyway, so black actually took with the queen, allowing rook takes f8. We always can take with the knight. Bishop f4, still looking at that d6 pawn. Looks a bit on the weak side potentially. Knight a4. This looks very nice to play knight b6 now, and maybe even put the knight on c4 to join up, gang up on the d6 pawn. Bishop f5, knight b6. The rook moves. So question here, in the game, bishop g5 looks tempting as played. The rook is holding d6, so I guess knight c4 is not actually doing that much here. So Magnus actually played bishop g5 here. This rook's loose though, so in this position technically queen e5 could have been played technically, but this is the rook just moves and white's still okay and doing well. Black didn't play that. Black played e3, and we get a simplification, okay, in this endgame now with the queens coming off. Before committing to that endgame, to look at that endgame, we might as well have a quick look at queen e5. So rook e1, rook e8. Why is white better if we go with c3? Why would white be better here? I think this pawn's not going anywhere. Knight c4's on the cards and d6 is still vulnerable. Alright. So black played e3 and we get this endgame. Bishop takes. Bishop takes c2, so this rook has to sacrifice itself for the pawn. Bishop e7. So basically mass simplification. Bishop takes b3, bishop takes c5. Opposite coloured bishops. King f7. Now king f7, hold on a sec. Yeah, the engine is not really indicating anything else here with moving the knight. The knight can't move there, but say it moved there, then d6 is actually quite good here. If knight e5, we just push through with d7, and then bishop e7 would be winning because knight takes between the pawn. So okay, so black played this king f7, and white now actually gave up the bishop for the knight, because after king f2 it looks as though the king is just going to glide down these dark squares. King e7, king comes up, protecting d5 just in time. g5, was that the best move? Well, it's difficult for black apparently. This is an interesting position here. g3, putting all the pawns on dark squares is a common method for Magnus Carlsen endgames, away from the colour of the opponent's bishop. g4, it doesn't matter that this pawn is advanced. It might actually be a liability in endgames. And here, in fact, white trusts this king and pawn endgame, because if we look at this, actually, this pawn is actually holding both pawns in a king and pawn ending. Given that, do you know what Magnus played here? Given his confidence for any king and pawn ending, what would you play with white here and be confident of winning the position if I gave you 20 seconds starting from now? So white's play here, what would you play with white? Any ideas? Time to pour a tango. Tango time. Is the chat still working? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, Magnus is confident about even the king and pawn ending here. He plays knight c4 check, because as I say, this pawn does seem to be holding both pawns. Now, if black doesn't take this knight, say king c7, apparently knight d2 is very good, hitting the bishop. And if the bishop moves here, for example, king c5, and then, you know, this knight's going to be really a menace with this passed pawn maybe. So black actually just, you know, took that. King takes. King d7 now. King c5. It looks like a Zugzwang case, because king b6 seems like a menace. It looks like a Zugzwang. King c7, d6, check. Now, Predator. It's, you know, I hope most of you've seen the film Predator, because I don't know why I keep making references to the film Predator, but there's a little thing to avoid here, and there's a little thing to play here at the last hurdle. Okay, so another little endgame test. So you lose 5,000 points on your next move if you get it wrong. So 5,000 points for the right move and 5,000 points for the wrong move. So what would you play here? I'll give you 20 seconds starting from now. It's important in these endgames to encourage precision. So I'm raising the stakes in the number of points here. So what would you play in this endgame position? 20 seconds. White's play. Any ideas? What would you play here with white? There's not too many candidate moves because the pawns are all fixed actually. Well, this one, you know, so that rules out that. This pawn can't move, this pawn. So there's only two moves to choose from actually. So which one is it? King b6 or king d5? So those suggesting king b6, are you 100% sure about that? You're 100% sure about that? Oh dear. There's lots of people losing 5,000 points here in this very simple position. Oh dear, Capablanca was right after all. We should all start with the endgames. Oh man. You know, in the film Predator, you would have gone straight into the trap here. King b6 is a trap. I'm sorry. King b6 is a trap. Let's have a look. King takes. King takes. Black now can choose between king c5 or king d7 to draw this. King d7. What do we do to make progress? We're just going into a trap. This is the most useless pawn ever. We're just getting stuck, aren't we? Are we? Are we getting stuck? If king c6, there's king b8 winning, right? Black in this position, if king c8, king b6 is winning for white still, but black has h6. Oh, ha! h6. Now what do you do? King a8, king c8, king a7, king c7. So what do you do here with white? You'd be forced to play this. If you're forced to play that, then actually white's losing. In fact, white's not only not drawing, white is actually completely lost. White has to play h3. You're forced to play h3 or h4, losing. I didn't mean it to be that amusing, but actually you've just lost the position. So if you try too hard with that move, you just get mated. All right. Oh god, that's comic. Sorry. Pardon me. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear. That is funny, isn't it? Oh, look at this. King b6. Actually, it had so much promise, didn't it? So we've got these two spare moves available. Let's just have a look at this again. This is unbelievable, isn't it? So king b6, we just take here. We've got two spare moves available. We encourage white to take the a pawn. So it limits white's being railroaded to have this poxy a pawn, which actually relies on the king getting out of there. And it just doesn't happen. And in fact, if white tries too hard, white loses, of course. Well, white wouldn't be that silly. So, you know, black just plays h6 here. And white has to accept a draw, basically. Yeah? So the important thing here is precision. In these endgames, precision. The move was king d5, and that keeps this, you know, this triple grip that we've seen. It's so important sometimes to get the opposition that grip, to get the black king to concede a square, or get black to run his two spare moves out of the position. Black uses one of the spare moves, and now king e5. And the thing is, here we've run black out of moves. We just go back here, and then we'll get this key square, e6. So black resigns here. If king d8, when we get the king on the 6th. This is really crucial in a lot of endgames to get the king on the 6th. And this is just trivially running black into a zugzwang, because here check, we run black into the zugzwang, Yeah? So it's not stalemate. Black has to use his move. He can do this. Black has to use this move. And that leaves one move available. This pawn. So it's not stalemate. Yeah, it's endgames, isn't it? Easy. But quite a lot of you lost 5,000 points there in that playing King B6. Now it's easy for me, of course, because I've got an engine switched on, so I knew that King B6 was losing. So I'm cheating all the time, by the way. But I just thought it was interesting anyway to just point that out. So don't feel bad. So let's look at another game. So Ian, oh no, I'm not going to say his name. Nepio something. Ian Nepo Miniachi. Okay, that'll do. Ian Nimia, whatever. Ian. Okay, playing with white against Magnus Carlsen. So this is game 6 of the 7 I wanted to show you this week. Yes, I'm glad I haven't chosen all 21 games to look at in one session, because this could be a long session. Otherwise, I think it's nice to go into a little bit of detail into possibilities, because otherwise it's like we're going too fast, but past beautiful scenery. Yeah, if we try and look at all the games in one session, even though they're 5-minute games, they seem to be very nicely played. So Ian playing white e4, and we see knight f3. We see d4. So this is Scotch game territory. Bishop c5. Knight takes queen f6. And white usually plays queen d2 here. And I've played this with black in Blitz myself. White usually plays queen d2 here. That's by far the most common move, actually, for those wanting to pick up some opening bits. In my book, queen d2. Queen f3 is second most popular with about 500 games. But queen d2 over 1,000. f4 was played, quite a rare bird. It does seem to be asking for a bit of trouble, doesn't it? f4. So Magnus played d takes c6. I'll be doing 7 games hopefully next Tuesday, and then 7 games after that. So I'm making 3 sessions out of these amazing Blitz games. So okay, so white played knight c3. And black apparently is doing well in this position from an engine point of view with the move knight h6, funny enough, which supports knight g4, which looks logical actually, because these squares do seem to have been weakened. But actually Magnus chose check instead. Okay, I'm intrigued, sorry, just for personal interest. Knight h6, what can white do here? If h3 we're asking for the check, what do we do? f5? That means that we got queen g4. Black just castles here, and rook e8, and now we've got knight takes f5. So that's still pretty handy. Bishop e2, bishop d4. So I'm just looking for personal interest. So forget that. So knight h6 is interesting to bear in mind, but check was played. g3, and the queen retreats. So now we've got knight f6 on the cards to hit e4, bishop d3. Again, the engine likes knight h6 rather than f6, with this idea of what's the difference between knight f6 and h6 here. Knight f6 was played, queen e2. Maybe it's knight. This threatens bishop g4. White has e5. Let's just check this. Knight h6 here. Queen e2. Bishop g4. I can't see any difference. Okay, let's get past this. So knight f6. Queen e2. Bishop g4. Black castles queenside. Bishop d2. Now knight d5 using the pin. White plays h3 now. Bishop e6. So white can't take here without this dreaded bishop takes d5 check looking down there. So we see a3, bishop d4, threatening just to double the pawns. Knight takes d5, and apparently this is a good move from white with an equal position. So I don't know if this last move was inaccurate. The engine suggests maybe knight b6 or knight e3 is tempting. So apparently for some reason this is equalizing now. Knight takes, c takes, and white castles queenside. D takes, bishop takes. So we're looking at b7, are we not? Yes. c6 protecting b7. Rook he1. Threatening f5 and then doing something nasty with this queen. So the queen steps out of the way. f5 is played anyway. Bishop d5. And now we see bishop f4 looking at the queen. Queen moves to b6. Looking at b2. That's protected. Now bishop takes e4. Queen takes e4. And for some reason, white's got an advantage all of a sudden. Something's gone wrong here, technically, for black. It seems we're talking about more than one pawn worth. I just want to quickly check for my own interest. Sorry, queen b6 was apparently not the most accurate. Apparently Magnus should have, in theory, taken on e4. And now not queen b6 but queen a5, looking at the rook here. This might have been slightly better. In what he played, this is good for white now. This position is apparently quite good for white. White is now threatening queen takes f7. And it's uncomfortable. Okay, so black took on d1, rook takes, and now Magnus protects the f7 pawn. And it's here that white apparently has what you'd expect, just bishop d6, just hitting the rook to try and put more pressure on the pawn. If rook e8, if rook d8, we can just take this. And if check, we can just play. Oh right, king c2 is better than king b1. King c2. If king b1, then this is okay because we've got a loose rook here. I think this is the point. If we've got a loose rook in this variation, I think this is out of the question to take here. Bishop e7, we're using the loose rook, but in this position, with accuracy, this should be okay. This should be achievable. This threat with king c2, and if rook here, I think we can take on f7. Okay, so this is okay. The check here, we can play here. Are we getting anything from this? And now we're threatening mate, so we are. So that pawn is significant potentially. But anyway, bishop d6 wasn't played. You know, white's not a computer or anything, so he just plays a4, and this lets Magnus now play a very good tactical move in this position to get out of these difficulties with this bishop d6 business. Actually, very neat tactical move. Am I imagining it? Hang on a sec. No, move 25. No, he doesn't play that. Sorry. No, the engine is suggesting bishop e5 here, which is a nice tactical solution. If takes, we can play check here. No, what Magnus played is actually h6. And still this bishop d6 is still on here. This wasn't played. If rook d8, we can just take here. If check, we can always just play king c2. if check here, we can play this, and we can play this, and this is better for white. We're still threatening this mate here. There's no tactical trick. So, okay, bishop d6 wasn't played again. Instead, white plays king b1. And now queen a5, looking at the f5 pawn. So that whole episode is being made ignored. That whole thing with bishop d6 has been totally ignored. So now finally black can just play bishop e5 to stop bishop d6. Bishop e3. a6. The difficulties have passed. This pawn is protected. This bishop's not going through the king like this. Bishop c5, rook d8. Rook takes, queen takes, and we're in sort of nearly equal territory now, because the taking the pawn here is not so brilliant. There's a check, and we can take this pawn, and this is just drifting into an equal position now. Check, check, perpetual check time. So white might have missed a tactical opportunity. Maybe he was scared of Magnus and trusted Magnus's position. But under greater scrutiny, it does seem as though there was a critical moment here where white might have been technically better. So instead of a4, just bishop d6. Apparently this is playable. So just one more game. So that was an interesting game. So a draw there. So in round 7, so just one more game this session. And this is a nice quick game to go over. Sorry, oh, Gould and Bennett. I put it in the wrong box. That would be embarrassing. Because it's 103 moves, this game. It's not a quick game at all, but it is round 7. I did look at 7 games, the first 7 games. So yeah, Magnus playing white. I think this will require some fast forwarding at various points. So Magnus playing white against Li Quang Lim, a 2-7-1-2. So a top player. So knight f6, knight f3, g6. We have g3, bishop g2, d5. Looks pretty solid. c4, c6. And so a solid kind of opening. And c takes d5 is the most popular move in this position. That is played. Now knight c3 is usually played. Magnus actually plays knight e5, which has been played before. Knight c3, e6, shutting down the bishop for a moment to protect d5. White castles, knight fd7. I've seen this position before a few times, I think. Knight f6. Bishop f4, knight c6. Should be about equal here. It's a solid position for black, but this is a problem bishop for the moment. Bishop d7, queen d2. Oh, sorry, we've gone past the game now. I wish I could answer with authority with the engine view. I don't know on that last game, bishop d6, bishop e7 question from YouTube stream. So I'm not sure. Maybe I'll check after. Questions on YouTube when it goes on YouTube after. So queen d2, we see rook c8, knight e5, queen e7. Yeah, this is what's going on. Nothing much. You see, this sort of position it's got symmetrical kind of pawn structure, and actually only one pawn taken off at the moment. So we'll go forward a bit. White now gives up the dark square bishop. So Magnus giving up that dark square bishop and playing f4. h5, e3. Bishop f3. It looks as though this might be of concern to black or not. g4, not really. Because this h pawn is weak at the moment. So there's nothing really going on. Nothing much going on. Knight e7, king f2. Knight f5. Knight e2. Queen d6, Queen a5. Okay, is there a threat? There is a threat of winning a pawn here. Queen b6, the queens come off. A pair of rooks come off. Another pair of rooks is about to come off. a3, knight d6, knight c3. So the engine evaluation here at move 29 is about equal. It looks as though, well, black's got the two bishops, but some issues structurally. King f8, e4 now is played. D takes, knight takes, and black takes on e5. D takes, knight takes e4, bishop takes, bishop c6, king e3. So we've got this endgame where is Magnus able to win this position? What do you think about this endgame? It looks quite equal, doesn't it? Or is black under severe pressure? King e7 was played. So I think one question is, well, why can't we just win this pawn? In fact, Magnus didn't go for winning. He played bishop d3, but let's try and win this pawn and see what happens. This looks very favourable. Oh, now I'm confused. Sorry, this is the score sheet I've got. Bishop c6. Why can't white just... What? Sorry, here, bishop takes c6. There's rook c8, creating that pin. Right? So this should be okay, this position, for black. That'll be fine. What we've just seen, king e3, king e7. I mentioned bishop takes c6 here. In this position, is this slight improvement or not on this pin? There's rook c4, maybe trying to get around here. B takes rook a4. Is that a slight improvement? Rook c7, rook a8. I'm not really sure that white has anything here, even though the engine is suggesting white's up by about a pawn. I just can't see it. Hang on, let's just follow this. b4, a4. There is a potential past a pawn. I'm not sure this is technically winning. So anyway, Magnus didn't go bishop takes c6. He just played bishop d3. And this is at move 35. So we have rook a5, rook c3, rook c5, rook b3, b5, rook c3, rooks came off, and move 39. Here is fast forward time, really, and we can do this a few times if I miss anything important. Okay, but remember, this is a 100 move game. That stops king c5. So what is Magnus's first plan attempt? g4. Okay, so maybe he's going to try and play h5 later and get to f7. That's taken. So is white going to play h5? He doesn't, actually. If he plays h5 here, black should be okay with just king e7. So he suspends that for a while. He doesn't do that. He plays bishop e2. Now h5 looks more tempting to go to f7 because the king's a little bit further. It is played here. Takes, takes, but now the bishop comes to protect the pawn. The thing is, it's a loose piece, and now this tactical idea f5 is played. And e takes is losing here for black because of e6. This is actually winning for white. Black actually played, though, king d7. And the engine suggests this is a winning position for white, funny enough. Even this position with f6. I think something wrong happened later on. King c7. it looks as though can't king go like this. So at move 52, I'm going to make a note of this, right? Sorry, at move 52, right? Magnus plays bishop f3 here, okay? So I want to make a note there in the text. He plays bishop f3. It doesn't go with the king plan. Let's have a quick look at the king. Why can't we just play this? Hang on, king c6, king f4, king d5. We can kick the king back. We can go here. We can lose this one. Play this. I don't know. Black can go win that one. We can go here. Lose this. King f8. Bishop moves. King takes. b4. King e7. And surely f7. b3. Take this. King b2. Well, we can queen the pawn. Sorry. We're just queening the pawn there. So that's a winning plan. What we get instead, right, at move 52, 53, is move bishop f3. And this apparently loses a significant amount of the advantage. It goes from being plus 10 to plus 2 with this move bishop f3 in one go. Bishop c6, and I'm not sure the plan is working here, because black can come around to d5 and take these pawns. So we see bishop e2, bishop e8, bishop d1, and the game continues like this, where okay, the white king is going like that, it seems, or not. Now it goes like that, and the king's there ready and waiting at the entrance. So how did that happen? And then we have this, and then basically Magnus is doing nothing for all these moves, and black could have actually claimed a draw towards the end of this by the 50 move draw rule. In this position, he could have actually, instead of losing on time, which I think happened, I think his last move was a blunder. No, it wasn't. No, I think black overstepped the time limit here. White does seem to be threatening a4. So if the king moves, then black would lose. Black, I think, lost on time. If king g6, this loses to a4 because of this pin. And then that's eventually going to be winning because we can create a passed pawn there. So if the king moves, black loses to a4. But in this position, apparently bishop f1 or even bishop a2 is drawing. Even bishop a2 draws. Bishop f1, if a4... Sorry, what am I talking about? Bishop f1... No, a4 is still good. a4 is still good here. This is still good for white. Can black draw this? Bishop a2, we're just losing the b5 pawn. Let's just go back. So bishop b7. Bishop e2. If bishop here, bishop d1, and we give up this. No, it's still winning for white. This does, I don't know. I thought I read in a chess-based article that this was a draw or something. I was a bit confused by the final thing, but it seems as though here bishop f1 we play a4 anyway, unless anyone knows something about this final position. White is going to be winning this pawn. Because if it takes, we're just coming back for this one with bishop c4 to stop this one. b5, we just plonk the bishop here, and that's going to be winning for white. Okay, so that was another way of winning, I suppose, with the bishop going around there. But if we just go back to move 56, 53, what I noted, move 52. yeah, it seems as though leaving the bishop here, the bishop's actually in the way of the king getting to f8. So in that variation we saw, so that slight difference with bishop f3, because that king coming over here. So actually this is quite an accurate move from an engine perspective, just to play king e3. So the bishop can't really do this. Well, this bishop takes f7 immediately anyway. Bishop takes f7. Even if we didn't do that, bishop f7. Yeah. Okay, so Magnus ground it down anyway. The way he did it was after 100 moves, got that position. It does appear to be winning anyway with this pin on this bishop like this. So black overstepped the time limit there. Okay, I hope that's clear enough. Okay, so see you next week for the next 7 games. Great stuff. I hope you got something out of it. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.